In this video, we are continuing topic 10 and practicing how to find intercepts using a variety of methods. We have already studied how to find intercepts given a graph where you can clearly identify the x-intercepts from the graph. But sometimes we are given a table of values. When you are given a table of values and you're trying to find intercepts, you want to look for the zeros. And what I mean by that is I want you to look for anywhere you see x is 0 or y is 0. And once you find these, you can identify which is which by either knowing the pattern, which is right here, that the y-intercept is always of the form 0, comma, number, and the x-intercept is always of the form a number, comma, 0. Or if you kind of blank out on remembering that, you can always do like a little mini sketch and see whether they're sitting on the x-axis or the y-axis. So from this right here, because the 0 is in the x location, this right here is the y-intercept. And so therefore, 0, comma 4 is the y-intercept. And this is the x-intercept. So therefore, 2, comma 0 is the x-intercept. And that can be done straight just from looking at whether the x is the 0 or the y is the 0. But like I said, if you kind of blank out, you can always plot the points. 0, comma 4 is right here, which is sitting on the y-axis. So it's the y-intercept. And 2, comma 0 is sitting right here, which is on the x-axis. So at any point, you can always just plot those and see which one it's on. For this next example, the zeros are actually both on the same point. And so in this case, we have that 0, 0 is both the x-intercept and the y-intercept. And so, again, if we wanted to do a quick sketch, you can see how that dot would be both on the x-axis and it's also sitting on the y-axis. And for our last example, when we look for the zeros, we find a 0 here and we find a 0 here. And now we can go in and identify which is which. Again, when the 0 is the x, that's the y-intercept. And just make sure you remember that it's the full ordered pair, it's not just the 4. And similarly, this will be the x-intercept, which is at 5, comma 0. So if I'm given a table of values and there are zeros there, then those zeros right away I can identify those are giving me intercepts. But even if there aren't zeros in the table of values, that doesn't mean that the line doesn't have intercepts. It just maybe means that the table of values isn't helping you find them. So you may want to check one of the other methods. So far we've got, if I give you the graph, finding them visually. If I give you a table of values, finding the zeros to identify them. Another possibility is that I give you a description of a situation and we are going to find the intercepts just from the description of the situation. So this is like written into the question is what I mean by this. So remember that as we already said, the x-intercept is the point where there's like a number, could be 0, might be a non-zero number in the x location, but the y has to be 0. So the output value is 0. Sometimes in a problem that's described as the end, or when is the height 0, or when is the break-even point for the profit. Because remember, break-even point for profit would mean that profit is 0. So anything that kind of connects to the idea of the output value being 0 might just right there in the problem tell you what is the x-intercept for that point. There's a similar way of thinking about it for the y-intercept. Since the y-intercept always has a 0 as the input value, and then it might have a 0 or a non-zero number for output, it is often the value at the start. Now, x doesn't always equal time, right? So it's not always at time equals 0. But whenever the x value equals 0, that's sort of that's often the start of our situation. So we'll practice using this as we go forward in the bookwork that's coming up. And I just want you to go through every single problem in the bookwork and try doing it with each of these ways. The last method is that I give you the equation for a situation, and we use the fact that we know when x is the x-intercept, that y is 0. We know that when we have the y-intercept, x is 0. And we can use that to actually algebraically find it. And this is going to carry on into higher level math classes and various different topics. And so this is a good one to really practice. So if I want to find the x-intercept, I can do so by replacing y with 0. And then I'll find the x value because I already know that the x-intercept is going to be something comma 0. That's the value. I don't know what it is, but I know that y is 0. So I keep x, x. I replace y with 0. And then that gives me 3x plus 0 equals 12, which means that 3x is 12. And if I divide both sides by 3, I get x is 4. And that gives me my value there. So my final answer is that the x-intercept is 4, 0. And I can do exactly the same approach to find the y-intercept. And I can do that by replacing x with 0 because I know the y-intercept is always a 0 in the x value, and I don't know what it is in the y value. So I rewrite the equation that I started with, but where there was an x, I'm going to use a 0. And that becomes 0 plus 4y is 12. And now I can divide both sides by 4, and we get that the y-intercept is 0, 3. So now I have 4 different methods to find the intercepts. And I think it can be helpful at this point to take one example. We're going to go back to that stamping machine example that we did in the previous topic, in topic 9. And we're going to bring it back over here and take a look at how we can use intercepts in that conversation as well. So that's our work on the next page. But before we go on from that, I do want to point out that as you go through the bookwork that we're going to do at the end, I strongly recommend that you try to look for how you can find the intercepts using as many of these 4 approaches as possible, because it'll really build your skill set in finding intercepts in a variety of types of problems.